The playwright. So there is a great deal of debate between whether the playwright or the director is the most important person in putting on a play. You can clearly say that without the playwright, there would be no play, so they're the most important. But whatever the playwright writes is always open to interpretation, and the person who interprets that is the director. The director is the one who looks at what the playwright wrote and decides how they conceptualize it and how they are going to put it on the stage. So from my point of view, and that's probably because I'm more a director than a playwright, I see the director as the person chiefly responsible for the art that is theater. Another argument for the playwright being less important than the director is that the playwright is really on the outside of the actual putting the show together and putting it on for an audience. In a published play, the playwright has no connection to the rehearsal process. In a new play, usually the director works as a go-between between the playwright and the actors, the playwright and the technicians and the designers. It is a rare instance when a director allows the playwright to speak directly to the actors or the designers. That's because it's not the playwright's vision, it's the director's vision. It's the director's interpretation of what the playwright created. Playwriting, and this was mentioned earlier, is both literary and non-literary. So you can take a class in Shakespeare through the English department, and that looks at Shakespeare as literature. But a play really hasn't reached its final form until it becomes action in the form of a performance. A playwright builds a play, and the word build here is important to why the playwright is called a playwright, W-R-I-G-H-T, and not a playwright, W-R-I-T-E. Write with the I-G-H-T refers to the maker of something. A long time ago, there were wheelwrights, and wheelwrights made wheels. So a playwright is the person who makes a play, who builds a play. Normally, when a playwright starts writing a play, they are working completely independently from any other artist. They're doing it all on their own. There are cases where playwrights are writing plays specifically for a specific theater or a specific director with a specific goal in mind, but that's the exception, not the rule. Because the playwright is working independently, usually what the playwright is doing is communicating from an intensely personal place. They're communicating intensely personal ideas, which is odd because almost all great plays speak to universal experiences, speak to shared experiences. So the playwright is taking their own personal views and ideas and creating a play that speaks to a much wider group of people. There's a little bit of a contradiction there, a little bit of a paradox. The two tools that a playwright really has to work with are physical action and dialogue. Both of these things are external human behavior. The inner story and theme of a play, the psychology of the characters, the viewpoints of the author, the social impact, that all must be inferred by the audience from what the characters say and what the characters do. Whatever a playwright's intended message or theme, perspective is, it has to be conceived as an event and then a series of events that make up a play that are designed to be acted on the stage. Eventless playwriting means you end up with characters on a stage talking to each other with nothing else going on. It's not a play at that point. It's not interesting either, but it's certainly not a play. The qualities of a fine play could probably be debated forever and ever. The book has it broken down this way. Credibility and intrigue. A play must be believable to the audience. It doesn't have to be realistic to be believable, but it has to have some sense of, yes, this is what these people would be saying and doing under these circumstances. But it also has to have intrigue. It has to be compelling. The audience has to want to know what's going on. There needs to be speakability, stageability, and flow. The dialogue and actions of the show have to be constructed in a way to have the maximum amount of impact on the audience. There are a decent number of novice playwrights who write plays that can't be staged. I worked with a group in Florida that had a playwriting contest for high school students, and frequently the plays are written as tiny little scenes that jump all over the place. That's the kind of thing you see in movies and television, but it doesn't work very well on the stage, usually. In order to change locations in a play like that, the flow gets interrupted. It's a bunch of disjointed scenes with too much time in the middle between them. A play's dialogue must have richness to it. You can have characters who are very low class, very low, poorly educated, but their dialogue is still rich. I completely agree with this one, that a fine play has depth of characterization. The characters are clearly defined. Again, a novice playwright frequently writes all characters having a single voice. If you're going to write a play, try to think about how that character talks as opposed to how you talk. There has to be compassion for the characters. If a playwright has a distinct dislike of a character, it's going to come through in the playwriting, and it's not fair to that character. You have to look at all people compassionately when you're a playwright and write them as fully and as honestly as you can, even if you disagree with their positions. A fine play has relevant themes and concerns to the audience. There really should be compression and economy. There should not be things that don't belong there. A playwright oftentimes will go through and get rid of scenes or characters or dialogue that they labored over, because they know it is not pertinent to the final product. There's an old adage in theater which is, show it, don't say it. It is far better to have complex relationships developed through actions on stage rather than people describing their relationships to one another. And a fine play also has intensity. It builds towards something exciting. If you want more about these, if you're interested in playwriting, read through the section in the book. However, I think you really would do better to go out and read some other books on playwriting, and not rely on this small chapter. There is absolutely no set formula for playwriting. Every playwright's process is different. If you're learning how to be a playwright, it is probably a great idea to go out and listen in on the dialogue between other people. Try not to be creepy if you do this. The playwright David Mamet, who's also a fine screenplay writer, spent a lot of his early playwriting days in Chicago in blue-collar neighborhoods, going into diners and writing down the dialogue that he heard. If you looked at his early writing, so his early plays, that is so evident because he tended to have working people talking in very specific ways. One of his plays that was turned into a very good movie, Glengarry Glen Ross, is about a bunch of salesmen, and the language sounds so much like what you would expect a bunch of salesmen to sound like. It's really quite amazing. We've talked about dialogue, but there's also conflict. You must have conflict, and that conflict has to be very important to the characters, and it must lead towards the climax moment of the play. If you're not writing towards that, you're writing a very flat play. And then a playwright must be interested in structure. Now, sometimes the structure is something they write instinctively, unconsciously. Oftentimes, they study the structures of plays, they understand how they're put together, and they write with that kind of structure in mind. Now, there's not a single structure for a play, but there are structures that work and structures that are less optimal. In the book, there's a section on current American playwrights. The section on these playwrights is interesting, and you might want to look through it if you have time, and especially the section, the photo essay on Neil LaBute. He's written some very amazing plays in the last 20 years.